All right, I think I am live now, so just kind of letting everything trickle in. I'm gonna have a little bit of just the start today. So, today we're going to be discussing the Russia Ukraine situation, crisis, whatever you want to call it. And so, essentially, what's going on, if you guys are joining just now and going, like, what the hell is going on in Ukraine? Essentially, if you've been living under a rock, the situation in Ukraine has been evolving over the past couple of weeks, and as some intelligence agencies have been saying, essentially we are looking at a possible conflict in Ukraine, and I'm not saying it's looking bad. I'm just saying that as someone who does remember what it felt like, uh, as someone who remembers what it felt like whenever the first Ukraine Russia crisis happened, essentially it essentially just feels like that it hasn't felt this spooky, I guess is the best framing to say. It hasn't felt this serious since since the situation back in 2014. So essentially, the question that maybe some of you are asking, and a question that I want to be asking right now, is what happens now? What is the next course of action that we should take? And that's whenever I'm going. That's why I'm going to have at least a couple of people join in on this stream. I am using StreamYard, so essentially I'm able to invite you guys into stream just in case you guys want to have a discussion about it. Just to kind of like keep it moderate. I want people that are at least like 15, 16 years old. Just kind of like it's more of just more of a formality. So if you're like super young, I would prefer that I not have any of those in this stream. Um, but so we got Ted Cruz, Amen, Maximo, Luca. What's up, everyone? So World War has no winners. If Russia destroys the U.S., it'll destroy itself in return, and vice versa. Which is why I don't think NATO will intervene full scale. Well, any sort of NATO intervention would have essentially end up devolving into a full scale NATO intervention because you can't just like send a couple of NATO troops in there and then oh man, what the hell is going on? Oh, they're shooting back at me. Oh no, I don't know. It just full scale. If you're talking, unless you're just trying to differentiate economic and military action. So we're going to be reading some of the articles that have been coming up on the topic. We're also going to be looking at a lot of Twitter, seeing what's going on Twitter. There's a lot of interesting posts that I've been seeing. So we actually have a International Center for Strategic Intelligence. So this is. Let me go ahead and do a little bit of research on this. Center for Military Strategic Intelligence. This is Strategic and International Studies. It is a bipartisan nonprofit research organization dedicated to advancing practical ideas and address the world's greatest challenges. Named chairman 2015, blah, 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 blah. Former U.S. Senator Sam Nunn of Georgia was the founder, I believe. So essentially, the International Center for Strategic Intelligence. Sorry, kind of moving things around real quick, so I apologize if you're just like, what the hell is he doing? In light of multiple countries ordering their evacuations to evacuate Ukraine immediately, and the announcement tonight that U.S. intel believes that Russia will invade in the coming week, we are now moving to our highest alert level, code black, for Ukraine. So there is code green, yellow, amber, red, and black. And black essentially means crisis, disaster, or major conflict, active or imminent. The risk to life is considered to be very high. Travel to this location is strongly advised against. And that was as of February 11th, 2022. So essentially, what we're looking at is that, and I was watching a couple of streams before I even came on here. Essentially, a lot of people are saying, like, well, it's because you know, it's like some sort of like false flag. A lot of people are saying like, oh well, like I don't want to get into a forever war. It's kind of just it's an interesting situation where a lot of people who basically, and I mean I believe even people that are like, oh yeah, we should defend Taiwan or whatever against the Chinese, but then whenever it comes to Russia, they're just like, well, Russia's I feel like it's because they have some weird affection for Russia. Not weird. It's not weird affection. Um, it's some sort of like bias in which if it's the Chinese, they're more keen on defending against Chinese interests. But who wants to go fight? Who wants to go fight Russia? It's not about going to fight Russia. It's not about trying to get into a war that possibly could devolve into a major conflict. But the thing is that w- that's the hard part about this, is that why do you just want to brush aside Russia going after a country that is obviously not theirs? Why do you think that it is, in the slightest sense of the word, a good idea to just sit there and not even appease them? You're basically just saying, "Go ahead." And I get who wants their family to go fight Russia. I understand that. I lost a family member in the war in Iraq. I know what it's like to lose someone in war. But at the same time, whenever Germany started going after Czechoslovakia, whenever they started going after Poland, we basically kind of stepped aside and said, not even we, because the United States obviously had their neutrality. We obviously stepped aside. The French and the Russian and the French and the British basically just kind of stepped aside and said, "No, we're not going to do it. We don't want to get into a war," because they lost a lot of people in the First World War, which is a very sensible thing to do because you don't want to sacrifice all of your men to get into that. But whenever it comes to things like this, whenever it comes to aggression against other countries, because you say, oh, well, they have a large ethnic Russian population. Well, if that's the case, then what stops Mexico from going after the United States because of the high concentration of Mexicans that live in Texas, in New Mexico, in Arizona, and California? What stops the Mexicans from doing that? What stops the Americans from going into Canada and saying, well, there's a lot of Americans in southern Canada, so therefore it's technically ours? Russia is Nazi Germany. I'm not saying that they are Nazi Germany. I'm comparing it to Nazi Germany because if the Russians go after Ukraine because they want to stop Ukraine from going into things like NATO and the EU, what's to stop them from saying, well, what about these countries that used to be a part of the Soviet Union? What stops these countries from that are already in NATO and the EU, and that they can give them a red line and say, okay, you saw what we did in Ukraine, so you need to leave NATO and the EU, or else we're going to do the same thing to you. Or just like they did to Georgia in 2008 during the 2008 Beijing Olympics, whenever they literally invaded a small country that was fighting against the terrorist organization or separatist organization inside of their own country. because they started shelling, I believe, positions in South Ossetia, and then the Russians just took that as a casus belli and launched an attack on them and basically invaded them for about 5 days and then withdrew. But I believe that the Russians in this case are not going to just go after a couple of cities and then withdraw, because the Russians didn't go after Tbilisi in 2008. They're most likely going to go after Kiev in this instance. What is stopping the US from expanding its empire and influence? Well, you're not exactly answering my question either, Lowenstadt. What distinct why is it okay for the Russians to just go after Ukraine? And if we just sit there and say, okay, we're not going to do anything, we've already tried that in several other scenarios. We've tried that from 1914 to 1917, and we tried that from 1937 to 1941. Both cases, in the first one, was the Lusitania, even though there was obviously weapons on the Lusitania that were being shipped over. We were still supporting our allies, but the Germans were still sinking cruise ships full of civilians in the Atlantic. And then in 1941, I mean, even 1937, 1938, there was a Japanese attack on a ship in Shanghai, I believe. And then in 1941, we put an embargo on the Japanese. The U.S. will not invade Taiwan. It has an agreement with the PRC since 1979, recognizes Taiwan as part of the PRC. You obviously have not read that document then, because that is not what the United States has said. Technically, we recognize that Taiwan is a part of China, but we never said which China it is a part of. We never said it is a part of the People's Republic of China, nor did we say it is a part of the Republic of China, but it is an irrevocable part of China. But in the document, yes, it was signed with the PRC, but then at the same time, that does not stop us from giving weapons to Taiwan, and that does not stop us from supporting Taiwan politically. Taiwan is not a part of China. And if you seriously believe that, then you are very misinformed. And again, if you guys are interested in actually having a debate with me, I don't mind having you on, so long as you are respectful and everything. Hey Nathan, what's up? Just having a discussion about Russia, about situation in Ukraine, and what the next steps are in foreign policy. So let's go ahead and look. So it says supposedly there's a Washington Examiner. Well, this was on February 8th, saying that Russia is about to pull troops out of Belarus following the military exercises. That the State Department is misinformed about the U.S. agreement with the PRC. No, it's not. Like, Taiwan is not a part of China. Taiwan is an independent country that is already independent of the PRC. The PRC has no right to walk into Taiwan and say, this is our country, no one else get involved because this is a civil war or we're just putting down a rebellion in Taiwan. That is bullshit. That is bull. And the Russians have no right to walk into Ukraine, say this half of Ukraine is mostly Russian, so we're going in to protect Russian citizens. But then, turn around and say, okay, we're going to install a government in Kiev. I think Taiwan is a country. It is a country. It is very much a country independent of the PRC. If Taiwan was really part of the PRC, then the PRC would be able to put down diplomatic or not diplomatic, like protests the way they did in Tiananmen Square and in Hong Kong. They have zero ability to do that as of this moment. Therefore, Taiwan is not a part of China. As many times as the Chinese can say, "Well, they're a part of China. They're a part of China." It's like a 5-year-old trying to say, "Well, this is mine. This is mine." Still need to debate PG. Ted Cruz, if you want to join in this debate, I would absolutely love to have you on. The document says Taiwan is a part of the PRC, but they never said they support it. But as they said, they acknowledge it. I'm gonna have to go back and look at the communique, but because I believe that it is purposefully vague on there because that's why the United States has the policy of strategic ambiguity. Three communiques. The first communique, 1972, known as the Shanghai Communique, summarizes the landmark dialogue between Richard Nixon and Zhou Enlai during February 1972. Some of the issues addressed in his communique include two sides' views of Vietnam, the Korean Peninsula, India and Pakistan, and Kashmir region. Perhaps most importantly, the Taiwan issue, Taiwan's political status. Essentially, both sides agreed to respect each other's national sovereignty and territorial integrity. The United States formally acknowledged that all Chinese on either side of the Taiwan Strait maintain there is but one China. The use of the word acknowledge rather than accept is often cited as the example of the United States' ambiguous position regarding the future of Taiwan. Ted Cruz, I can literally post the invite into the chat, and then I can have you on here. You don't need Discord. This is literally a way for me to invite you, um, and then I can have you on the stream. You don't need that. You just need a StreamYard account. I really have zero clue about much of this. I would be zero match for you. I just don't see what we stand to gain compared to what we stand to lose. If it's such a big deal, let someone else deal with it. And again, I understand that we have our own problems. I understand that, oh well, because it's so much easier. Because yes, there is a lot that we can lose in a war. There's obviously a lot that we can lose. We can lose a lot of men and women, especially. That is the main thing that we can lose. But if we're also, you know, putting all this stuff out there, basically saying we're the most powerful country in the world, we are the head of one of the largest political military organizations in the world. We went into places like Yugoslavia whenever there was a genocide happening, and there's a lot that we can lose, but by principle, if you want to stand by principle and say the United States' principle that we've been putting out there since the end of World War II, since the end of the last Great War, it's it's a double-edged sword. Yes, we can lose a lot. But then at the same time, why should we allow these countries to just walk into other countries, say that they're theirs, and then and just be like, okay, that's okay. Where would the line be drawn at that point with you? And risking World War III for Ukraine, I don't think that's worth it. That then at the same time, again, like going back to the last war, was Poland worth it? Was Czechoslovakia worth it? Was knowing what we know now, what exactly where would the line be drawn? Would it be drawn at Ukraine? Would it be drawn at the Baltic states? Would it be drawn at Poland? Would it be drawn at Hungary? Would it be drawn at Germany, France, Britain, Spain? I'm not even globalist. I'm not even in no way, shape, or form am I a war hawk, but I'm realistic in the way that I look at war. I don't look at it saying like, well, I don't want to get involved because I don't want to, risk this, 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 and this. I'm not looking at it as avidly anti-war, but at the same time, I'm no war hawk. I'm not sitting here saying we need to go to war. The line is NATO. But that's the thing, is that if the line is not drawn at Taiwan and if the line is not drawn at Ukraine, it's going to involve NATO. It's going to involve Japan. It's going to involve Korea. It's going to involve the Philippines, Vietnam, Australia, Indonesia. If you don't say, okay, if you just say, okay, we'll make a deal with you. Here's Ukraine, here's Taiwan. They're not going to stop there. They're not going to stop there because they have other claims too. Russia and China literally have counteracting claims, but the only reason that they're unifying at this point is because of the United States. Perhaps the UN would send peacekeepers. As non useful as the UN is, depends, but that would require a Security Council vote, and both the Chinese and the Russians would vote against it. But yeah, but back then they didn't have nuclear missiles that could. And again, if you're seriously sitting here saying like, oh well, I don't want to get into war with Russia or China because they have nukes. No one is going to use nukes if we end up going to war with each other. That would be an absolute stupid idea that neither side wants. The only reason that nukes would be on the table is if there was a direct invasion of the Chinese mainland, of the Russian mainland, or the American mainland, or French or British mainlands. That is the only reason nukes would ever be on the table. If we go to war with a nuclear power, nukes are not going to be used unless that nuclear power is on the brink of capitulation. Unless they feel like they're in a corner and they're like, okay, hey, all the gloves are off now. We're launching everything. We're pushing everything that we've got. Okay, sorry about that. An EMP burst over North America will cripple the. See, come on, come on. You're looking at it. You've played too many video games. We've all played Homefront. We've all played Homefront. We've all played like games where this has happened. We've all watched movies. We've all played video games. No one is going to launch an EMP over North America. No one is going to launch a nuke at an American, Russian, or Chinese city. Cyber attacks are going to happen. That's the biggest thing. It's not even EMPs anymore. You can do the same exact type of effect that you can with a EMP that you can with a cyber attack. So it doesn't make sense for even to waste a nuke, even a single nuke on an EMP. So cyber attacks will happen. Nuclear war is unlikely to be used by the USA. Other countries, perhaps. The US knows the devastation. And that's the thing. The Chinese know the devastation. The Russians know the devastation. The Americans know the devastation that a nuclear war could cause. It's not you can do the same damage as an EMP in your mom's. That's funny. No one is going to crash planes into yeah. But no, come on, man. Be realistic. Like if you seriously think, well, they're going to use EMPs, again, I think you're playing way too many video games. That's not going to happen. No one is going to waste a nuke on an EMP because that would draw again. If you are presiding over the point that you are going to pull your own gloves off and immediately go for the throat, you're not going to be looked at as well as you probably would want to. Both sides want to come out of this conflict as pretty looking as they can. But and that's the biggest thing. It's not even about what it will entail, it's about how it would look coming out of the conflict. And that's again why I don't think that nukes would ever be on the table in any instance again unless Russia, America, China, India, Pakistan, France, Russia, or even Israel are on the very brink of capitulation. Ukraine asks US to cool their jets, no pun intended, absolute. I think I saw that too. And that's also what I wanted to talk about as well. What I wanted to talk about as well. There is a lot of talk coming out of Ukraine because I think there was a news agency that literally asked him saying, "Hey, what is your response to this?" And he said, "We already know this. Why are you talking about it now? We've been dealing with this." And I think I saw a couple of things on let me find it. Whenever I was looking up some stuff on Twitter about it, basically saying like this is nothing new. Like we are absolutely ready to fight against this blah 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 blah. So trying to look. And what really gets me is how some right wingers are basically treating this. And as a right winger, as someone who voted for Trump twice, 2016 and 2020, and again, not as a war hawk, but as someone who knows the cost of war, and as someone that is a little realistic about what could happen if we were to get into a conflict like this. I don't think that the US should basically like overplay this because the media can overplay it, the US government can overplay it because back then, that's all they have to cite is saying, well, they said that the intelligence community is saying, well, they're about to attack Ukraine. And then, well, the intelligence community said that they had weapons of mass destruction in Ukraine, in Iraq, and blah, 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 blah. What really gets me is how all these right wingers are basically saying, well, Eastern Ukraine is a part of Russia. Eastern Ukraine, it's not our fight. It's not our fight. And that's what I was saying before. Like, it will eventually become our fight. It's just that you're pushing it further down the road. Slavery kept on getting pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed until the South seceded and fired on Fort Sumter. World War II got pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed until the Germans went after Czechoslovakia and then all of Czechoslovakia. And then they went after Poland. And then even after Poland, they said, okay, we're going to ceremoniously declare war on you. We're going to invade your territory just a tiny little bit called the Saarland, the Saar offensive. And then, oh, France just fell within 6 weeks. And then Britain is on the complete brink of collapse. If you push this stuff off, it's going to bite you in the ass. And that's one of my biggest fears if this were to happen is that if we just let Ukraine fall, if we let Taiwan fall, it's going to hit us in the ass, just like it did in World War One, in World War Two. And that's why you see some of these really strong reactions against things like in Yugoslavia, in Iraq in 2000, in 1991, in just these recent conflicts that particularly involved NATO. How quickly and how fast they actually acted against the perpetrators of whatever they were fighting against. People need to ask why now. My main thing about why now is history has still been going, and it's been 30 years since the fall of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union fell in 1991. The biggest thing about why now is because China is in a position to do it, because Russia is in a position to do it, because they weren't 30 years ago. The Russians were dealing with the worst economic crisis since the Russian Revolution at that 30 years ago. The Chinese were still an agrarian society 30 years ago. And look at them now. They are two of the most powerful economies and militaries in the world now. They are in the utmost position to do what they please because they have been building to this moment. Because they are pissy at the West for things that happened in the past against, I believe, broken Western promises to not have NATO expand into places like Poland and places that were under Soviet rule back in the Cold War. The Chinese are pissy at the West because of what happened 100 years ago in the days of the foreign legations in Peking and in places like the century of humiliation is the best term to call it, in which the West basically enforced these unequal treaties on China, and China is finally in a position to say, "Your guys are assholes because you did this to us 150 years ago to 100 years ago," and they're coming back with a vengeance. A lot of these countries, mainly Russia and China, know the past that they have been through. And their countries now are built because of those pasts. It may not feel like it. None of us are even old enough to have ever. Some of us are not even old enough to have even seen the final time that the Soviet flag flew over Moscow. That's why it seems so. Oh, it's so long ago. But in terms of history, it's very recent. That's how I see it as well. Why now? The history is so recent. That is 30 years ago that the Soviet Union fell, that Ukraine became independent. How much is the Russian economy relying on gas exportations to the US or EU? The biggest thing is that if the Russians were to do an invasion of Ukraine, it would be extremely bad on their economy. I believe that would eventually get them to become more dependent on the Chinese economy, which, I mean, that could open a whole other can of worms. But it's again, it's a very big double-edged sword. US is about to have a freedom convoy that's of its own that will likely end in a siege. Jesus Christ. It's got a whole lot of interesting comments in chat. Russia owns the Donbass region in Crimea. The rest is Ukraine. See, that's also BS. No. If you think that Russia does not, if you think China doesn't own Taiwan, you should also believe that that Russia doesn't own um, Crimea. The biggest difference between those two is that the Russians literally do have military and political control over Crimea. Most of them are Russians, but that shouldn't matter. That's again, that's literally like saying Southern Canada is mostly American, so the Americans have the right to just walk in there and just declare it theirs, where the Mexicans have a lot of people in places like Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and California, so then they can just walk in there and take it. If you're gonna just literally say these places are these places belong to these countries because they have a very high population of ethnics, depending on what you're talking about, that I don't know. That's I feel like that's a really bad way of looking at geopolitics. I mean, it's essentially geopolitics, but then at the same time, if you're deciding policy off of ethnicity, it's a very big can of worms. Because again, the Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia, the reason the Germans wanted that is because there was a high ethnic majority of Germans there in the Sudetenland. So, well, the Russians have a lot of people there again. These arguments have been made before. And the last time that that was made, we had very bad wars that took place in Germany and Yugoslavia because these countries wanted to walk in there and say there's a lot of ethnic majority of blank, of Germans, of Serbians in these places, and we want to take it because we want to make sure that we have our ethnic majorities. And that ended up leading to some of the worst atrocities known to man. I'm not saying that the Russians are going to walk into Ukraine and commit a genocide. I don't think that would happen, especially the Russians. Even given that the Russians have also committed genocides against Ukrainians before, but in the 21st century, I highly doubt that would happen. You can't compare Mexicans in the US because for the most part they assimilate. I'm not saying it like that. I don't think you listened to what I said. What I said is that if you're basically saying that you can just make a claim and say, well, there's Mexicans, or there's Americans, or there's Russians in these places, and then you're using that as a reason to walk into another country and take their land, that it's stupid. Lowenstadt, thank you so much for joining in on this discussion. See you later. If you guys haven't, go ahead and subscribe. Donate to the channel if you haven't. I know this is a heated discussion, but we're all here to have a lively discussion. PG in Ukraine, Russians are oppressed, if I am correct. But what is your source on that? Are you just literally listening to what RT is telling you? Or are you What are you looking at? Russia has no right to bring back imperialism. But then at the same time, the US has had some instances of imperialism in the past, namely Iraq, where the US just made up this reason, oh, they have weapons of mass destruction, and then walked in there, didn't find anything, and then just left 10 years later, less than 10 years later. The US has made mistakes in the past, but at least that some of our governments have basically even said, yeah, that was a mistake. Trump administration did that. The Obama administration did that. I think the Biden administration too. We're out of those wars now, and I think that's one of the other reasons why the Russians and the Chinese are acting up now is because they couldn't 10 years ago. If they were able to do it 10 years ago, the US wouldn't have been able to do anything because we were too bogged down in Iraq and Afghanistan to do it. But the Russians and the Chinese are in a position now to where the US military is unable or is fully able to concentrate on Russia and China because we actually have our military back. We actually have troops that we would be able to use, battle hardened troops that are familiar with guerrilla warfare. But in Europe, culture is different. The US has immigrants because that's part of their national identity that doesn't exist in Europe. And again, yeah, but I believe I even have friends in Europe that are also very worried about this. I'm seeing some people saying like Europe doesn't care. Europe does care. I have friends in Britain and in Norway that are especially worried about what the Russians are doing. Some of them want to stay neutral, but they're especially worried about what the Russians are going to do. And I just don't understand why some people are basically like red lion politics, for example. Red lion politics on Twitter is basically saying like, oh yeah, Eastern Ukraine belongs to Russia because they're majority uh they're majority Russian. That is the worst possible outlook on geopolitics. And you're even pushing neutral countries like Finland and Sweden into NATO. NATO needs to back off Russia. Having all of Scandinavia in NATO would be very cool, but that would escalate things with Russia even more. See, that's the other thing. Just like the Russians making demands about and this is literally proved my point whenever it came to that. They're not looking at just Ukraine. The Russians are not looking at just Ukraine. They are literally making demands that the United States needs to withdraw troops out of Romania and Poland. They literally want in writing on a treaty that they can sign with NATO and the United States that NATO and the United States promises that they will not, under any circumstances, put troops in Eastern Europe. Because they said if they don't, that will allow them to have a reason to say, okay, we're going to start putting missiles into Venezuela, into Nicaragua, into Cuba. What does that tell you? They're literally risking to go back to the worst part of the Cold War whenever Soviet missiles were put in Cuba and we almost had a nuclear war because of missiles in Cuba. At the same time, we had missiles in Turkey. But that's what I'm trying to say is that The Russians don't are not just thinking about Ukraine. They're not looking at just Ukraine. They're looking at Eastern Europe as a whole. They're not going to stop at Ukraine. They're going to give a red line to Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania to say, if you don't leave NATO and the EU, you're going to end up like Ukraine. I'm not just pulling that out of my ass and saying, geopolitics, blah, 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 blah. I'm saying that because it's a realistic scenario. Just like the Chinese are not going to stop at Taiwan. They're going to look at Vietnam. They're going to look at the Philippines. They're going to look at the first island chain like Japan and South Korea. If you don't draw the line in the sand at the very beginning, they're going to keep moving that line. And by the time you even say, okay, we're going to draw a serious red line here, just like that happened in the last war, where the red line is at Austria. Oh, never mind, it's not. The red line is at Czechoslovakia. Okay, never mind, it's not. The red line is at Poland. It moved all the way to Poland before they finally said, okay, the red line is finally here. And whenever they went to war, they didn't even do anything. They literally called it the phony war, where they literally invaded a tiny strip of land in Germany and then evacuated after a week. If the US joins Ukraine, would you enlist to serve? At the moment, depending on how the war would turn out, it depends. If the country, if the US comes back and starts saying, "Hey, we need men," I possibly would consider it. But I am very much confident in our military, and that's one of the biggest discussions that I've been having with people is like, I don't want to get drafted. It's a very hard decision. So I have had interest in the past to join the military, but at this moment, I do not have any interest. So it just depends. If they start going in and they start committing a genocide or they start killing civilians left and right, if something were to happen to Americans abroad or at home, that would probably consider a lot of people to join up. Like after Pearl Harbor was attacked, they didn't even have to institute a draft. Actually, they had already instituted a peacetime draft. But there was a lot of people that were literally leaving their jobs and going to sign up for the military saying like, I want to go fight. But I think that's a more of a I think that's kind of like a one-sided question where it's just like, well, you're pushing for where you're saying like you support going into a conflict, blah 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 blah. So are you gonna sign up to fight, blah 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 blah. I don't want a war to start. I don't. I'm not pushing for a war, and I'm also not saying that the United States should get involved. But what I'm saying is that if we had a stronger response to a lot of what's been going on, if we had more of a red line, because we don't really have a red line, we're basically just saying if you invade Ukraine, you're going to get hit with some of the toughest economic sanctions you have ever gotten hit with. Does the US still draft its soldiers? It does not. We stopped that draft in 1973, I think. 1972, 1973. It was right after Nixon came into power. I think it was 71. We stopped the draft. but we don't do conscription. We don't do any sort of like peacetime draft. So the biggest thing about the United States is that the United States has what, like 1.4 million active duty, 1.3, 1.4 million active duty troops, heavily trained, some of the best equipped military in the world. It would take a lot to do that. Even if we were to go to war with Russia or China, it would take an extremely, extremely bad situation in order for us to institute a draft. There's no good guys here. It's We have the best quote, apparently. You can say that all you want, but at this moment, at this stage that we're at right now, it's going to make a lot of sense why we spend so much on our military. And if we just like get involved and then we're like, oh, our multi-billion dollar aircraft carriers are just getting sunk left and right, like pretty sure we would withdraw with before anything bad were to happen. The only thing that matters between superpowers is nukes. And again, if you're seriously jumping to the nukes, I think that you're playing too many video games and watching too many TV shows and movies. Because again, I play games where you literally play as countries and deal with foreign affairs and international relations and stuff like that. And all the time I can just say, "Oh yeah, we're going to use the nukes." Blah 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 blah. Like in a realistic war, in a realistic World War III, it is not. It is again. It is going to take an extremely desperate situation for anyone to start using nukes because the Russians don't want that to happen. The Chinese don't want that to happen. The Americans don't want that to happen. If it gets to the point of nukes, I will become Joseph Seed from Far Cry 5. I do like how that lore kind of happens in that game, where it's just like, oh, literally, it doesn't even tell you until you play the DLC that like, oh, this like really intense geopolitical situation has been going on outside while you've been trying to free your friends in Far Cry 5. I need to finish that game. I haven't even finished it. See if there's any other updates on the situation in Ukraine. So, what time is it? I've been streaming for nearly an hour. I'm gonna go ahead and end this at about the hour mark. I'm probably gonna come back later. We're gonna be playing City Skylines. Um, so it's a tricky situation. I don't want a war to start. I really don't, because it is not fun for kids to go through and see their own parents get a call and say your son or your daughter was killed. It sticks with you for the rest of your life. So I don't want people to go through that. But at the same time, we have to be realistic and say we can't just let countries go across and take things from other countries because because they say that those countries have a lot of people that belong to them. It's going back to the double-edged sword situation. You can't do that. It's not right. It's happened before and it didn't play out the way that those countries would have wanted it to. And just like that, yeah. In Romania right now on holiday. Is Romania safe? Yeah. I mean, I can't really say for sure. Talked about Romania a little bit earlier, but Mr. Mulhall, haven't seen you here, by the way. Yeah, so Romania is pretty safe, I believe. Like the Russians aren't going to invade them unless start going into Moldova or something like that. Like the Russians and the Chinese are only doing this because of what the Americans have done to them before. They're wanting to kind of come back and say America has been invading countries for false pretenses in the past, and then they want to turn around and say, well, we're one of the major powers of the world. We're going to go ahead and start bringing these countries under our sphere of influence because they were under our sphere of influence before. It's geopolitics. That's all it is. And whenever geopolitics starts to play out in an actual shooting war between major superpowers, it's not it's not what we want. But then again, just like I said, there has to be a line. And if your line doesn't stick and you keep moving that line, just like the chemical weapons in Syria. The chemical weapons in Syria was a red line. And what did we do? We shot a couple of missiles at Bashar al-Assad and then declared victory. Given that those missile strikes were very powerful, there should have been a larger military response to that. I'm not saying we should have put boots on the ground, but there, I believe, just Obama did this and Trump did this. Chemical weapons end up starting to be used, and then they're like, okay, shoot a couple of missiles, and we won. Ouch. I think that in the case of Russia, they're acting all cocky because they need a buffer space with the West. And after the traumas of World War II, speaking of the Chinese, I agree with PG's explanation. Yeah, that's exactly what the Russians want. That's why they're giving these demands to the Baltic states, to Romania, to Poland, because they want to make sure that the whole point of the Warsaw Pact, the whole point behind the Warsaw Pact was to stop an American, British, French invasion of Russia, because the Germans were able to get all the way up to Moscow, to the outskirts of Moscow, with ease, with relative ease until the winter hit. The only reason the Russians won that war is because, for one, of sheer numbers that they had, sheer economic power, and then the elements giving them the benefit. So the Russians now, how many kilometers? Talk about this, and then um we'll talk about this, and then we'll go ahead and end it off. If NATO were to join Russia or join, hang on, if Ukraine were to join NATO, for example, the closest point from Ukraine all the way to Moscow, and the biggest reasons why the Russians were doing this is saying, well, the Ukrainians, like, if they were to put missiles or military units in Ukraine, Moscow would only have like 5 minutes to get underground if a missile were to be launched from Ukraine. So, in kilometers, from the closest point from Ukraine to Moscow is about 432 kilometers or 268 miles. So, if you were to launch a full scale military invasion of Russia, it would not take you long at all to drive 500 kilometers on the road. It's a driving route if you were to take the highway. It wouldn't take you that long. Maybe within a year, Moscow would fall. Probably within like 6 months, Moscow could fall if the full scale NATO invasion were to take place on Russia. If they were to move in from Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, and then also move in from Ukraine, given Belarus would be neutral in this conflict, which they wouldn't. So we can take Russia down in a month. No, I didn't say a month. I said like 6 months to a year. But by that point, that's whenever the Russians would be nuking. Nukes would be flying at that point. And again, it is 268 miles from the border between Ukraine and the outskirts of Moscow. And I'm not even talking about the center of Moscow. I'm talking about the outskirts of Moscow. Let me even see the auxiliary highway right here. Because I did the furthest most. Let me try. Furthest most. Because it's going to be considerably shorter. So this is the border from Ukraine all the way up to the furthest auxiliary highway outside of Moscow. Oh my god, I'm gonna cry. And that's why I say this is a geopolitical issue, because it's more of like, okay, so the distance between the Ukrainian border and the furthest auxiliary outside of Moscow, which the closest city that it is I'm pointing this to, is Obninsk. Obninsk is the city. Also, it's like Obninsk and then Serpukov, also north of Kaluga. The CIS, yeah, we're not even we're not even talking about a CIS intervention, but I'm pretty sure the CIS only composes of Russia. Russia is the backbone of the CIS. Kazakhstan is too politically unstable to really afford a war against NATO. Belarus would lose immediately. Azerbaijan might be a considerable force. I'm pretty sure Turkey wouldn't even get involved against that. Turkey would probably immediately leave NATO if it composed of a war between NATO and Azerbaijan. Then you have Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, and maybe I don't think that Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan are even a part of NATO. Not NATO, the CIS. Ukraine ain't far from Moscow. And again, that is the whole point of why the Warsaw Pact was made in the first place, and why Germany was split up with one under Soviet influence. The whole reason why is because Russia wanted to make sure that any enemies that they had, namely the United States and the West, were not able to hit Russia just as easily. They want a barrier between any of their enemies in Europe and Moscow, because they were on the brink of collapse against the Germans, and they don't want to fall that easily. So Moscow is in a very special position to where if they look at it, they're like their capital is within 500 kilometers of a border. Like not even 500, it's like 300 directly, but again, if you're considering highways, it's about 500. It's very strategically important for Russia to ensure that no country is going to be able to take their capital or even threaten their capital. And they are not in a position like that. So that's why they want to cover their southern flank with Belarus and Ukraine. And that's why they also have the interest of going in and installing a friendly government in Ukraine. That's why Kiev is under threat, because just like in Georgia in 2008, the furthest they went toward Tbilisi was Gori, the city of Gori in Georgia. But they didn't go to Tbilisi. They didn't even make a move toward Tbilisi. Because at Gori they just said, "Okay, I think they get the point," and they stopped. They didn't go in and install a friendly government. But in this case, they want to, because they already lost control of that government after the fall of the I think it was the Poroshenko government in 2014. And even then, if they were to get a friendly government, they could start leasing the ports in Ukraine. And then if another government were to take over in Ukraine, that would then give them access to more of the Black Sea. It would give them more than just uh what's the city down there in what's the city down there? It's slipping my tongue. I'm trying to find it right now. Sevastopol. Sevastopol is a very strategic point in the Black Sea. But if they were to get places like Odessa, like Mykolaiv, haven't said these cities in so many years, and Mariupol, that gives them an extremely good position in terms of access to the Black Sea. The other thing about it too is that if they were to go after Ukraine, they would and install a friendly government, they could immediately get rid of that central power structure that they have in Ukraine and say, okay, you have a different government now. It's going to be more like a federation where all of these different provinces have more autonomy. Therefore, the central government would have less power. How well do you think the US's notable anti-ballistic missile self-defense system would fare? I think it would. Can't stop all of them, so a lot of them would get through. You can stop some very strategic cities from getting hit, but I think there's a treaty that we have with Russia where basically the only missile defenses are around like our capitals, but I don't know if I think that was like it wasn't open sky. It was one of the treaties, one of the treaties that we had, but I don't even know if that one's even in force anymore. What about Ukrainian military tech if Russia takes over? Russia would absorb it. They have a huge surplus of weapons after they take Ukraine. That treaty ended years ago, ages ago. That might have been a Cold War treaty then. Let me look because I think I'm getting confused with it. It was called the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty. It was an arms control treaty between the United States and Soviet Union on the limitation of anti-ballistic missile systems used in defending areas against ballistic missile delivered nuclear weapons. It was signed in 1972 between Richard Nixon and Leonid Brezhnev. It was ratified by the Supreme Soviet and the US Senate. Under the terms of the treaty, each party was limited to 2 ABM complexes, each of which was limited to 100 anti ballistic missiles. Signed in 1972, it was enforced for the next 30 years. In 1997, 5 years after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, the former Soviet republics agreed to the United States to cede the USSR's role in the treaty. In June 2002, the United States withdrew from the treaty, leading to its termination. 2018 statement by Putin on new weapons. Russian President Vladimir Putin, March 2018, in an address to the Federal Assembly, announced the development of a series of technologically new missile defense systems, missile systems, and stressed that those were designed as a response to the U.S. withdrawal from the ABM treaty. Statements were referred to by the Trump administration officials as largely boastful untruths, but also as confirmation that, quote, Russia had been developing destabilizing weapons systems for over a decade in direct violation of its treaty obligations. And that was actually one reason why it was a very famous treaty. I can't remember the name of it right now. What was it? It was START. It was a START treaty. So START 2. That one came into no, Russia withdrew from START 2 in 2002. What was it? Nuclear weapons limitations. The new START. Effective expiration. It was extended in 2021. Okay, so that one was extended. I thought it was left. It was called New Start. It was signed in April 2010 in Prague, and after ratification, entered into force in February 2011. It expected to last until February 5th, 2026, having been extended in 2021. Placed a treaty sort, which expired in 2012. That was under Dmitry Medvedev. So let me look. Mutual detargeting, strategic arms limitations. Man, this dude in chat just asked if I was a Russian bot for pointing out how Russia wants to divide EU and NATO and gain favor with Eastern Europe through shared identity. That's what they called. That's what they do via info propaganda. Thank you so much, Carter, for the $10. I appreciate that. What if allies win and possibly win Russia? What would happen after? What do you mean? What does that mean? Do you think Russia will invade Ukraine? It's been good. I might have to go. I might. I have to go. I might stop by later. I'm probably gonna end within the next like 15 minutes. I wanted to end like 15 minutes ago, but starting to get into like treaties and stuff. So if you guys like to, hang on real quick. If you guys like to have discussions about foreign policy, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. I do like to have discussions about foreign policy. It's one of the things that I am heavily interested, more honestly, more interested in than in what do you call it? Like domestic. I like foreign policy. I really enjoy talking about foreign policy. Start 3. I'm really trying to find the one. Vladimir Putin is in chat. What is going on, Vladimir? Vladimir, since you're here, why are you trying to invade Ukraine? Absolutely. We got the one and only in chat. The one and only. Really trying to find this. Hang on. Who would Thailand side with in case of a Sino-American war? I don't know. Never thought about that. Probably no one. They'd probably want to stay neutral. It was the IMF. The IMF treaty. That's what expired. Okay. That's what I was missing. It was IMF. Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. IMF or INF. Treaty between the United States of America and Union of Soviet Socialist Republics on the elimination of their immediate range and shorter range missiles. U.S. President Ronald Reagan and Soviet Secretary General Mikhail Gorbachev signed a treaty on December 8th, 1987. The U.S. Senate approved it in 1988 and ratified it in June 1988. The INF banned all of the two nations' land-based ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and missile launchers with ranges of 500 to 1,000 kilometers, short range, and 1,000 to 5,500 kilometers, which was in intermediate range. The treaty did not apply to air or sea-launched missiles. By May 1991, the nations had eliminated 2,692 missiles, followed by 10 years of on-site verification inspections. Amidst continuing growth of China's missile forces, U.S. President Donald Trump announced on October 20th, 2018, that he was withdrawing the U.S. from the treaty due to supposed Russian noncompliance. The United States claimed another reason for the withdrawal was to counter a Chinese arms buildup in the Pacific, including within the South China Sea, as China was not a signatory to the treaty. The U.S. formally suspended the treaty on February 1st, 2019, and Russia did so the following day in response. The United States formally withdrew from the treaty on August 2nd, 2019. Will war come tomorrow? We don't know. Why are you having why is your profile picture the German Democratic Republic? U.S. withdrawal and termination. We see China, Iran, and North Korea all developing capabilities which violate the treaty if they were parties to it. So the possibility that could have existed 15 years ago to enlarge the treaty and make it universal today was just simply not practical. Russia unsuccessfully called for a vote to get the UN General Assembly to consider calling on Washington and Moscow to preserve and strengthen the treaty. Russia had proposed a draft resolution 193 General Assembly Disarmament Committee, but missed the 18 October submission deadlines, so it instead called for a vote on whether the committee should be allowed to consider the draft. Are questions about the games you play allowed on the stream? I mean, yeah, whenever I get to them. Russia presented the 9M729 SSC-8 missile and its technical parameters to foreign military attaches at a military briefing on 23 January 2019 held. And what it said, it was an exercise in transparency and hoped it would persuade Washington to stay in the treaty. The Russian Defense Ministry said diplomats from the US, Britain, France, and Germany had been invited to attend the static display of the missile, but they declined to attend. The U.S. had previously rejected a Russian offer to do so because it said it was an exercise which would not allow not allow it to verify the true range of the missile. The summit between the U.S. and Russia on 3 January 2019 failed to find a way to preserve the treaty. The U.S. suspended its compliance with the INF treaty on 2 February 2019 following an announcement by Mike Pompeo, Secretary of State of the United States, the day prior. In a statement, Trump said that there was a 6-month timeline to fully withdraw from the INF and INF treaty termination if the Russian Federation did not come back into compliance with that period. Within that period, the same day, Putin announced that Russia had also suspended the INF in a mirror response to Trump's decision to suspend a treaty effective that day. The next day, Russia started to work on new intermediate range ballistic hypersonic missiles along with land-based 3M-54 caliber systems. Both are nuclear armed. In response to the U.S. announcing it would start to conduct research and development of weapons prohibited under the treaty. Does the United States even have hypersonic missiles? So the United States AGM 183 ARRW, top speed Mach 20, range 1,000 miles, cruising altitude unknown, and it would be launched from a B-1 bomber. So AGM 183. That is the hypersonic weapon planned for use by the U.S. Air Force, developed by Lockheed Martin. The boost glide weapon is propelled to a maximum speed of more than Mach 20 by missile before gliding toward its target. It would have an operational range of 1,000 miles or 1,600 kilometers, and it would be able to be launched from a B-1, a B-52, and a F-15. Development and acquisition. U.S. Air Force awarded a $480 million contract to Lockheed Martin for the development of an air-launched hypersonic weapon. The resulting missile, the AGM-183 AARRW, or Arrow, underwent initial captive carry flight testing aboard a B-52 in 2019. In February 2020, the Trump administration proposed 23% increase in funding to hypersonic weapons, and the same month, the U.S. Air Force announced it had decided to move forward with the acquisition of the AGM Arrow. So we're going to call it Arrow. March 2020, Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering Michael D. Griffin stated that the United States was close at hand of having a hypersonic boost glide weapon ready to the field. And testing, a booster flight of the Arrow took place in April 2021 at Point Mugu Sea Range off the coast of Southern California, but did not launch successfully. This was the 8th test of the Arrow. Another test from May 2021 for the Arrow's avionics, sensors, and communication system was successful. The test did not use any of the Arrow systems, but instead used a B-52 based system on a flight to Alaska from Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana, the B 52 was able to receive target data from over 1,000 nautical miles or 1,900 kilometers away. In July 2021, the second flight test at Point Mugu Sea Range, again being dropped from B 52, was a failure as the rocket motor failed to ignite. On December 15th, 2021, the third test flight failed to launch as well. So, looks like that we do have some hypersonic weapons. It's just that we're trying to get them to be able to be tested out. So they're not really even field tested yet. So do we even have US defense information? So we have the ability to make it. It's just that, and that's the thing about why we even left the INF at first, is because we're so far behind on some of this technology that the Chinese and the Russians have been developing for years. At least Russia has been in violation of the said treaties. And that's left the United States like in a position where we didn't want to violate these treaties, and then they've been just developing them in violation of said treaties, and then now we're lagging behind in some of these weapon systems. So again, tricky situation. Do you violate a treaty, or PJ, are you going to stream City Skylines after this? Yes or no? Yeah, probably later tonight, before like 8. What time is it now? It is 6. So after I eat dinner, I think after I eat dinner, we'll try to do City Skylines stream. So look forward to that. And if I don't, then I'm gonna stream tomorrow. I do have a job interview coming up in the next couple of days, so we're gonna be scheduling my YouTube around that job whenever I do get it. So I'm gonna go ahead and wrap it up here, guys. If you guys like this, go ahead and leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you're new. If you guys want to see more content like this, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss anything whenever I do post it to the channel. And if you guys want to talk more about foreign policy, go ahead and again subscribe and hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss whenever I do go live. I noticed a couple of new people in stream. Thank you guys so much for helping me hit 5,600 subscribers. Let's go ahead and see if I actually hit that after the stream. Let's look. And we are at 5,599. So if someone wants to become my 5,600th subscriber, go ahead and make that happen now. Go and hit that red subscribe button down below. And I'll see you guys later tonight. And if I don't see you guys later tonight, I'll see you guys tomorrow. So we're going to try to do City Skylines and start continuing to develop the city of Irwinville. So I'll see you guys there. Thank you guys so much for watching. Subscribe to the channel. I'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you guys so much for watching, and take care.